Hello, everybody, and welcome back to day 13 of the road to 2100 on chess.com Rapid. Today, we are currently sitting at 2044, so let's jump into our 10-minute game for the day and see how we do. Now, looks like today we're going to get a 2033 from Madagascar. I don't know if I've ever actually played against Madagascar. So we're just going to play d4, d5, and we see the move knight to f3. So we know that this can transpose into many lines. I still don't have my prep fully figured out for this variation. So I'm just going to play the move c5, immediately attacking the center. After our opponent plays the move c3, I think here I just want to take with c captures d4. This way this opens up the light square diagonal to the king. I'm going to go knight to c6, attacking the pawn, probably follow up with knight to f6, bishop out. And generally just trying to go for pretty standard development. Now, there is an argument here to play a move like bishop to g4 early, and maybe even a move like g6, bishop g7, e6, and knight g to e7. I don't really know how I feel about all those moves, so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to trust my intuition. I'm going to play the move bishop to g4, something a little bit different. If our opponent comes in, definitely going to consider the knight recapture. I do have to be a little bit careful here. Is in this position, similar to a lot of carrot cons, when this structure is missing, it actually does get a little bit risky for us to play in such a manner. So here, let's proceed with what my earlier idea was. Let's go with the move g6, bishop to g7. And I'm generally going to go for this setup here. Here, I think the move, I'm going to stick to my guns. I think e6 makes sense and is a logical move. Queen to b3. Goes after here. I could play the move queen to c7, but I do run into knight to b5. So although it doubles my pawns, I'm actually going to play the move queen to b6 and try and neutralize the attack. Because most of the time our opponents don't want to trade this queen. This is a case where they do. And our opponent can come in with the knight. Not a huge deal. I do have to be a little mindful of this check here on d6. But I don't hate what I've done with this position. You see bishop to d2. I'm going to play knight g to e7. We see rook fc1. I think it makes sense to castle. Now our opponent, now we're at least out of the opening. Even if we're slightly worse, I think it's still very playable. Now a3 does weaken the b3 square. If I were to play the move knight back, and our opponent tries to defend, I have a really strong square here on c4. So I'm going to go exactly for that. The knight, because it's currently blocked here, doesn't actually see, the bishop doesn't see the knight. Even if it did, bishop takes, pawn takes, I think is a better trade for us. And I might want to bring my second rook potentially on the f rook to the c file, where it's going to be a little stronger looking down this open file. Because as we transition this game into an endgame by trading a couple pieces, that is going to be one of the big ideas here. Now, our opponent did blunder in exchange. The idea being that after we play here, knight takes, the rook is under attack. I think I actually have their knight captures rook, forcing our opponent to take back, and then potentially move like rook a to d8. Because if our opponent gets greedy and takes, we have knight captures bishop with check. So let's go for this line. Also, we're attacking a bishop. So if our opponent's not super careful, we do have other tactics. And already here, I am seeing bishop captures knight, and after bishop captures, we win the bishop. They can win the exchange. So takes, rook takes, rook takes. These are both still under attack. So let's go bishop captures f3, a little bit of an intermezzo, hitting the bishop, hitting both rooks. Opponent takes back. Let's take the bishop. If they take our rook, we actually have is it better to come back and hit these with tempo? Or is it better to go into an endgame where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, bishop and knight? I suppose after rook takes, there is rook to c7, which would be quite annoying. And this damages the pawns. Is this bishop really that strong, stronger than this knight? I'm not really inclined to believe so. If I take, opponent comes in. I can save my knight, or I can play check and then save it. Yeah, I'm just going to go for this line. I know it allows for rook to c7. Knight in, rook takes, knight here, threatening to come here, or threatening to get to the really strong square here. Let's start by cutting the coordination, so knight to c6. It does allow for some passed pawns. I might break with the move e5 to split the pawns. And I don't think I actually want to trade. I don't want to trade rooks in this position. Now, what's the best way to go about the position? If I play the move e5 now, the rook attacks. I can go back. Yeah, let's go e5. This does leave me with this pretty weak d-pawn. But I think I might be able to hold the position. I don't necessarily hate what we've gotten ourselves into, but I've also created a lot more complications than I was hoping to. And the idea might be just to chase around this knight for a bit, which I also don't love. So let's go knight to a5. Trying to get to a stronger square. If our opponent takes, we have bishop takes. There's no check. Although after rook here, that definitely becomes a possibility. And at that point, I might be forced to trade down into the endgame like that. But I guess knight to c4 cuts the coordination, albeit temporarily. So it feels like a very sharp position we found ourselves in an endgame I don't find myself in very often. Because I don't play a lot of positions where I get into bishop or knight and bishop versus rook. Especially not ones where I'm down 2 pawns. So when we get to the end of the game, I'm going to look back at this position here where I had an option of playing knight to b3 or potentially rook captures and then knight to f5, but our opponent's in the tank. They're thinking pretty hard about what they want to do here. If I could induce b4, this knight gets even stronger. It does make me a little sad, though, that I weakened my my d pawn this significantly, but that's the nature of playing this way. So we do see b4. Let's go knight to c4. If takes, we have bishop takes. If takes, takes. Bishop takes here. Also looks quite strong. This pawn is also under attack twice. So we do see a4. So I'm going to play e captures. We're going to play bishop captures d4. I somewhat expect to see the move rook to d1. And is there any way for me to defend everything? I don't see it. I'm trying to see if there's some idea like takes. But I also don't see that. Here I'm going to go for knight to e5, going after the f3 pawn. These are strong, but I have a passed pawn in the center of the board. And if I can get the A and B pawns off the board, I actually think that I'm going to have a much stronger position. Only because these pawns are so weak. Now, if I trade off the 2 pieces for the rook, it's probably a draw. Although I'm assuming it's not quite that simple. So the king comes up. I can add a second attacker to this pawn. If I go here, opponent comes over. I don't really want to walk into that. So I don't have bishop here. Knight to d3, rook over. Knight takes, rook takes. There's no clear follow-up. Can't go bishop here. And now my knight's kind of misplaced. So let's go knight to c4. Rook to d7. I don't know. I really don't know here. I feel like I have to have something. Potentially bishop back to g7. Now this looks like it weakens everything else. Now, if I just play the move like rook to a5, there's check, but I go to g7. Now I can get my knight to b6 and win this pawn. And that just goes as like the knight is a great blockading piece. Potentially also have knight to b2, but I think knight to b6 makes more sense. Rook takes, knight takes, pawn up, rook takes. And the idea is my opponent wants to stop me from going here. But that actually doesn't stop me because the bishop defends. My biggest challenge here is really that my position is going to get a little bit fragile. But if rook to d2, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook over. I have this pawn, my opponent has this pawn. It's not super clear, but I think I'm doing okay. Rook takes, rook takes. Yeah, okay, so I saw this move. If rook takes and rook takes here, I think I have to go for this variation where I give up the knight. Let's go rook to b4. And I'm just going to start pushing this pawn. I can potentially try and activate my king. Although I don't think that's the best plan of action either. Potentially h5, g5, king up. Let's go king g7. I think here I probably have to play the move h5. And we found ourselves in a lot of drawish positions recently. Did I invite h4? Maybe. But then rook takes. My opponent's king can't get into this pawn, is the really important part. King g5. Yep, b6. Rook to king to f6. And as long as I go here, this over doesn't work. So let's go king to e7. King d7. Rook f8 is an interesting move. Rook takes, rook check, king up. Rook takes, king takes here. I think I'm doing okay. I might have miscalculated, but I think I have one tempo. And eventually you're going to have to come in. Or you have to give up space. Oh, I'm so dumb. I need to go this way. I can give up this pawn. And I think they just realized that they have to give up the pawn as well. There we go. And I'm just going to give this up. Opponent's going to play for a flag, which is their right. All right, so we won that game on time, although we did get into a winning pawn endgame, so we're going to go through that in the game review. So let's check that out, because we are up to 2052. So very, very tight game. I do apologize for being quiet at the end. I wanted to focus in there. Don't forget to say GG to my opponent. So on today's date, we played with an 81.2, and our opponent played with a 78.6. So in this opening, d4, d5, knight f3, and c5, my whole idea here is really just to throw our opponent off by grabbing some central space with the flank pawn. After c3, c captures knight to c6. Although this is a little bit less traditional, my whole idea is really just to make sure that our opponent is not comfortable with keeping their pieces and keeping this open file. Now after knight c3, bishop to g4, e3, and g6. Apparently this is entirely wrong because our opponent has a fork, which I didn't see the fork. What is our opponent able to do? Oh, queen to b3. Oops. Yeah, that would have been bad. So, something to look forward to in the future. But after g6, bishop b2, and bishop to g7, the same idea lingers as queen to b6. However, after we finally played the move e6, we defended our pawn. Queen to b3 was just a little bit too slow. Now queen b6, queen takes, and a takes. And although we've traded the queens and we have doubled b-pawns, the position is still very barely better for white, and I really don't mind this transformation of position. So bishop d2, knight g to e7, rook fc1, and castles. And really what we did here is, even though we didn't know theory, we just followed our plan of getting all our pieces developed. So after a3, knight a5, knight a4, and knight to b3, we have this pretty massive fork incoming. Now our opponent found some really nice counterplay with knight captures b6. After I played bishop captures f3 first, bishop captures f3. Here I had to find probably the slower move. I'm going to guess it's like rook a to d8 or even rook a6, because now this bishop isn't defending the square, so that would have been a continuity issue that we simply didn't see earlier. But instead, after knight captures d2, knight captures a8, I was considering the move back knight to b3. However, I thought this was a little bit too slow. I also could have played the move rook captures a8 and left all these options open, but I thought after our opponent plays a move like rook to c7, the counterplay is a little bit too quick. I probably have to play a move like knight to f5, and after rook takes, there is no longer this bailout. So here, I'd probably play knight captures bishop, and pawn captures bishop. And in this position, potentially knight to d6, trying to get to c4. But that is not the position we got into. I went knight captures f3 first, g captures, rook captures a8, and then rook to c7. And we get into the same position where we're going to be dropping we're essentially going to go down 2 pawns while we have that bishop and knight versus rook. So after knight c6, rook takes, and e5. This was incorrect, and really the bigger takeaway from this position is that this pawn structure was very, very strong. As soon as I played e5 to try and break, I just immediately weakened the d-pawn, which gave me some troubles later on. Here, I probably should have played the move knight to a5, trying to get to c4, and to put some more pressure on these pawns back here. But instead, our opponent nearly punished our mistake, but b4 did allow us to play knight to c4, playing a very strong outpost square. Now a4, e captures d4, we actually win our pawn back, and now the material is equal, although we still have this imbalance. So rook a2, knight e5, king to g2, and knight back to c4. I really didn't know how to proceed in this position. I potentially could have played a move like king to g7, just a passive waiting move. But apparently here, the only move to keep advantage is the move knight to d3. Putting a second attacker on this pawn. Now, what I thought was going to happen is after rook to d2, I didn't understand what was next for us. I guess the engine just says play knight to f4. After king g3 and bishop to e5, our defenses are quick. We're going to be winning these pawns, and this is a winning endgame for black. So I didn't quite have the tactical eye there to get through the full sequence. But instead, I played something that I thought was a little more solid. After b5, rook to a5, rook c6, knight to b6. Here, our opponent played the move rook to d2. And apparently here, this is an only line to keep the position somewhat equal. So after rook captures a4, rook captures d4, rook captures, and rook captures b6. We enter this endgame where it's a very drawish endgame. We each have a passed pawn. We each have 3 pawns. My kingside pawns are a little bit healthier. So rook b4, king f1, king g7. And really what I did here was I had to be pretty careful. Is this position is already better for black, but I have to play it in the right way. Here the only move was the move king to h4, and I thought that our opponent's going to be able to get through, and this is just much, much too strong. Apparently, if they continue to push, I see what I did wrong. When I was sparring endgames, shout out to Yokinator if he ever watches these videos. Him and I would spar these endgames all the time. So when the rook is on b8 and the pawn is behind it, and you have a rook behind the pawn, my opponent can't actually promote the pawn unless there's a check. So this gives me all the time in the world to come and collect these pawns here on the king side. And as long as I don't step onto a square that's able to be checked by the rook, my opponent can never promote this pawn. So had I seen that, and this is one that I'm going to work on because I am working through some endgame books, I would have felt much more comfortable in playing a move like king to h4, which is the only move for advantage. Instead, I went for this position where I tried to win the pawn, seeing that I would actually be able to trade back the pawns here. There are some positions where if, let's say, oh man, let's say my king was here, and I can't take for some reason. So if we'll go here, king back, rook takes, and we imagine rook captures f7 wasn't takeable. After king to e6, then you have rook captures b7, and you just lose material. But in this position, I was able to get back to my pawn, and after h4, king d6, and f4, king to e6 apparently throws the advantage. Our opponent there probably had to push through with f5. Ooh, king to c5 is a really nice move, and I'm too slow. After king takes here, by the time I go up and win these pawns, our opponent is going to be able to stay right here. Oh, sorry. They have to play the check. And once I go away, then we enter this position where there's nothing left. Instead, we wait until our opponent made a mistake with the move f3, allowing us here. I should have played the move king to f5. If our opponent takes, it's a very clear winning endgame. Our opponent, by the time that they get in, we're going to enter this position, and although it's a rook pawn, after king h6 and king to g4, there's no way to stop promotion. This pawn will run, and we'll get a queen. Then we have 20 seconds to find a mate. But instead, we finally did find the correct idea. We sacrificed our passed d-pawn because our king is going to run to these squares. It's just much simpler from here. The reason I gave this up was I was playing a little bit too quick, but essentially, after the move king to g3, king takes pawn. Same idea, is h4, king can run, but there's no way to get to the pawn. We'll get a queen. And in this position, once again, if I was my opponent, I would have tried to play on because I only have 13 seconds to find mate with a queen and a king. And I've definitely failed that before on the channel. But yeah, we held on. Chess.com gives us a 2100 rating for that game and gives our opponent a 1950. So it's good to get a win. Maybe not the cleanest win, but we're going to take it because we did have some nice finds there. And you know what? On that note, I appreciate all you guys watching, and I will see y'all on the next episode.